.NET Testing Using NCrunch with Tony Cardella.
The Azure and DevOps podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using the latest in .NET, Azure, AI, and DevOps. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. The show is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a full-service software architecture and engineering firm. Find them at www.clearmeasure.com. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your teams move fast and deliver quality and to run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that the .NET ecosystem has to offer. My guest today on the show is Tony Cardella. He's a seasoned software engineer based in Houston, Texas. He has a robust background in enterprise development. He brings a deep expertise in the .NET framework and C# and Python and cloud platforms, including Microsoft Azure, Amazon AWS. And his technical repertoire spans both the relational databases like SQL Server, MySQL, Postgres, and NoSQL solutions like Azure Cosmos DB. He's a strong advocate for developer productivity tools, and he frequently leverages JetBrains products, including ReSharper and DataGrip, PyCharm, Writer, as well as Visual Studio. And outside the world of code, Tony is equally passionate about strength training and whether he's lifting weights himself or coaching others in the discipline. Tony, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fantastic. I'm happy to have you on here to talk about testing and NCrunch. I always like to just help the listeners get to know the expert I have on the show with me. And so, if you kind of going back in your career, if you can remember some of the turning points that kind of steered your career into the types of things that you're working on today?
Really, it's just kind of when I graduated from A&M, I was looking for a job and trying to find a job, and basically having a consulting company reached out. They were already working at a company that I was already working at the company this consulting company had an engagement at, so I kind of changed badges, changed paychecks, and started working for them for a little bit. And then that just kind of started me on the path of, all right, we're going to do consulting now. And then when, that starts to kind of not be as much fun as it used to be, then we'll switch over and do something else. And so it's let me kind of flip-flop back and forth between consulting and, more product and, working in IT groups and things like that. So.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, you've done some speaking recently on NCrunch, and we should give a plug to the North Houston .NET user group. And we've had some other guests on here talking about testing, and it's just one of those things where the industry really hasn't nailed automated testing, it doesn't seem. And you've got a really interesting angle with NCrunch. I want to dive into that. Before we get into the nuts and bolts, though, there's probably some listeners who literally never heard of what the heck NCrunch is. How would you give the pitch?
So I'd say that NCrunch is there's an automated testing tool, right? So it's not going to generate your unit tests for you, but it's going to run them continuously, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you go through and kind of configure it so that you're not running all your unit tests all at once, but maybe just only unit tests that are impacted by whatever changes you're making in your code base. That's typically the way I run it. There's a bunch of other features that NCrunch has that I just have not had a chance to get into, but they're really neat. Is kind of the best way I can put it. So they have some visualization stuff they do that shows you when it's actually running your unit test. It'll show you kind of a graph that shows you they'll switch between like green and red, depending on if your unit tests are passing or failing, that kind of thing. I don't know if that really provides a whole lot, but it's so kind of color.
Anytime you look at a tool and you listen to you see the feature set, you say, okay, that's cool, it's feature set. But if we don't understand, or if we're not feeling the problem that the tool solves, then we look at it and say, well, okay, do I need it? So InUnit has a runner, Visual Studio has a runner, ReSharper has a runner, Rider has a runner, and so with just regular testing, what's the problem? Why we need a different tool? What's the gap?
So my experience with it is when you're using, and I like Rider, all those other tools they're good at what they do. They all run your unit tests, yes. But the one thing that I noticed that NCrunch did that the others didn't is NCrunch is always trying to run your unit tests for you, right? So as you type your code, it's trying to build it and run it, and that works out great if you're constantly running your unit tests and you're up to your neck in code trying to figure that out. If you can kind of just take that having to think, all right, I need to trigger the unit test to run just off the board, it helps you kind of stay focused on what you're actually doing, and you're not necessarily focused on are all the unit tests actually running. And just as NCrunch runs, you're going to figure out what's running and not running just based on the visualization that they have that gets added to Visual Studio, where it shows a series of dots down the left side. That's usually either gray if it hasn't run or there's no tests on it, green if it has unit tests and it's passing, or red and the tests are failing. So that's good, especially if you're really getting into some intricate logic, like lots of ifs and if-then statements kind of thing. Hopefully you're not writing your code that way, but sometimes we get backed into doing that just given the requirements we get, and it'll help you kind of visualize what's actually covered by your unit tests and what's not. The only downside though is it doesn't tell you the quality of your unit tests. So yeah, you might have a unit test and it might be actually running it, but it's not going to tell you if it's doing anything worth a damn. So
Gotcha. Well, this goes to actually having unit tests, and then having tests in general. If it's always trying to run the unit test in the background, that would presumably require you to have actual unit tests, like tests that really only test a certain amount without external dependencies, so that they can be run in the background over and over without those dependencies. What's your view on testing in 2025, and kind of like what you see as absolute requirements in automated testing just to be doing a basically good job as a software engineer?
So this is kind of like an 80-20 question, right? So you spend 20% of the effort to get 80% of your code covered, and then you end up spending the other 80% of the effort to get the last 20% covered. Just from writing unit tests, I would try and cover the 80% with the least amount of effort first, right? And then as you come across bugs and places that are really tricky kind of edge cases and things like that, you need to add on to that atom. Because if you go through and you try and unit test everything to the to 100%, you can. It may not be the best use of your time, right? Because when you're just cranking out unit tests, you're not actually building features and moving forward. So
yeah.
There's a fine line there.
I agree with you, and I started doing automated testing in I think 2005, so I guess 20 years now, and I've done and I tend to favor test-driven development for new code, but just recently I was really surprised because I'm learning GitHub Copilot, and everybody is, and what can we use it for and all that, and you're right, there's some areas where just writing the test, it's just a whole lot more effort to set up some fake dependencies and all that. And I turned Copilot to a particular scenario, and yeah, you had to generate some test doubles and some fakes and and some interface implementations just to kind of stub out a particular path, but it did it, and it covered the path that I needed, and it was fast, and I was pleasantly surprised. And I'm wondering, does it finally break that paradigm where, yeah, we want to spend the 20% thinking about the main paths, but as opposed to leaving the hard ones uncovered, it's like, shoot, maybe Copilot helps us to fill in those gaps here.
Yeah, since I started using NCrunch, the AI and LLMs are kind of, that's new, and being able to generate unit tests on code you've written is really handy. And I've done that in a few spots, really just kind of trying to play around with these, Copilot and things like that, trying to figure out, all right, how do I actually use it?
Yeah.
So one of the other things, though, is if you have AI that's generating all these unit tests and everything like that, it's generating, well, depending on how you're doing it, right, you can generate a bunch of code really quick. If you generate the code, put it into your code base, and NCrunch picks up the changes that have been added and then automatically runs it, you're picking up a little bit of time every time you do that, because now you don't have to stop and trigger the unit test to run, whether it's just a shortcut or you're getting the mouse and you're going on a hunt to go find where's the button that runs all the unit tests.
Right.
So
yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned code coverage and how much is, did you say that NCrunch kind of gives a signal on what methods, what lines are covered and which ones aren't?
So there's two ways to answer that question. So there's code metrics, which NCrunch does give you, and it's in the grid, that you can go through and you can figure out, what classes and which projects and things like that, what the code coverage is, and it aggregates everything up like that. But actually in the window where you're actually writing your code, it does give you an indication over what's actually covered and what's not covered. And it does that by a series of dots down the left-hand side that are either gray for uncovered, green for covered and passing, or red for covered and not passing. So
that's super helpful. I mean, how else would we know without running a full code coverage tool and looking at the report and diving in?
Right. But it also kind of shows you exactly where your unit test is falling over, where it's failing, because you'll see where it comes through and it's red, and then all of a sudden it'll kind of stop, and there's the red dot becomes a red X, and then there's gray dots underneath it. So they tell you exactly where it's actually fallen over. So you don't have to go diving through stack trace or anything like that unless you really want to.
Yeah.
So, and if you're already in the code, you may not need to do that.
Yeah. So is NCrunch specifically focused on unit testing, or does it support a larger scope tests as well?
So you have to make some changes, right? Because typically if you're going to be running like an integration test, right, with all the other different dependencies, those can actually run longer. So you just have to crank up the timeout on that particular test, or you can also do it. The only time I've had to do it was been updating the timeout on a per unit on a per test basis, and that was when I was doing some larger integration tests kind of thing, where I wanted to kind of make sure that, all right, what I'm writing actually kind of holds together, and so it works pretty good, and it's nice to know that, all right, when I'm writing the test, this big integration test is always running, and as I make changes, it's going to tell me if I broke something that I wasn't aware of when I was actually writing it. So that's nice.
Yeah. So really, the sweet spot for NCrunch is your faster tests.
Yeah. But it'll run some of the longer ones fine too. But it also depends on how many resources you actually have on your system. So like I'm running like a computer that I built like in 2011. So I need to upgrade that because
time for an upgrade.
Yeah. So the other thing I was going to say is, and I have not had a chance to play with this because I have not had extra computers to do this, but NCrunch also has distributed processing. So, you can hook up other computers like over the network, and it'll run your unit tests basically on a remote system, and then you'll get updates when it's done.
Interesting.
Yeah. I'd like to see them actually get it working where you can have it like run your unit tests like on a Raspberry Pi or something like that, because I've got a few of those laying around.
Any old computer.
Yeah.
Now, does it run it parallel, or does it just run it how you have them configured, whether parallel or not?
So those are settings that you can configure in NCrunch. Typically, I think the way I typically run it is I'm just kind of running them serially, right? One after the other.
Mm-hmm.
And that tends to work for what I'm doing. And the other thing is when you start running some of these unit tests, depending on how you write them, you can introduce other problems like if two unit tests are changing the same object, right? You can end up with what you're actually testing ends up changing, I guess is the right way to put it.
Yeah, if you have a singleton and you've started it up, then one test could stomp on the other.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, same thing with it's really common. It's really common with entity framework integration tests to clear out a table and use and throw some records into the table and then run something and then check it. And if two of those are trying to run at the same time, then they're going to step on each other. But also, it's really common to have the last integration test in your data access tests kind of throw some test data into your local SQL Server database running locally, so that when you hit Control F5 in Visual Studio, it pulls up the app and at least has the few records that the application needs to run. So if we need to have all these tests constantly running, then that dependency would have to break, because that's not going to work with records. Or you'd have to have like a manual, like a database for me and then a database for the tests, so that I can still run the application locally and do some things while all these tests are just continually running in the background, it would seem.
If you're not trying to unit test the database, right? If your database is an external dependency to your code base,
right,
that you're doing, then I would probably switch over and just use the in-memory provider that Entity Framework has.
Yeah.
And maybe only use the a physical SQL Server for a handful of tests. I don't know, just a thought. I don't know. It's going to kind of depend on what kind of environment you have. Right.
Yeah, you're right. It's when you're thinking that, okay, now it's time to commit and push to my branch. Well, that's the time that I want those data access tests to actually run against the complete database. But all the gyrations until then, yeah, maybe that in-memory provider would be just fine.
Yeah, I would think that you were more likely to start running into issues with your database if you're writing your code database first, where the database is kind of this is the corner of the central pillar of the application, right? And we can't have anything happen to it. And I remember writing, applications like that back in the day, and kind of going from database first to kind of a code first approach, I think is a lot better, because now you're not as hyper fixated on what's going on with the database. You still have to be careful with it, right? Because if it blows up, you're kind of screwed.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I like the code first approach as opposed to database first. But
totally.
You can find people that a guy I'm working with now does not like code first, development. And okay, yeah, he's in charge, so I guess we got to do it your way. It's
He has the authority. A little bit of authority going on. Awesome.
And it's a large database too. So
yeah. So is NCrunch kind of like a single developer tool, or is it really, does it have some like shared team benefits also?
Well, if everybody on your team is using it, I would say that's a benefit, right? But I'm not aware of any features that allow it to. I don't really see how you would get. Now, maybe I just don't understand your question, but I don't.
Yeah, I didn't know if it like had certain things for the build server, or if it really was just like a single developer on our box kind of tool.
Yeah, so I would just use it on the development machine that you're actually writing your code against, and then the CI/CD pipeline is, if you're following good DevOps practices, that's going to run all your unit tests. I'd say that NCrunch probably would not help you with that, simply because, as far as I know, NCrunch only runs on Windows, and like CI/CD pipelines, at least the ones I use, they're all running with the Ubuntu. So that's Linux.
Okay.
And if it's running in a pipeline, I'm not really concerned about the speed of the unit tests that are running at the time. I mean, if it takes hours to run this stuff, okay, I'm going to start getting concerned. But if it's all right, I might be able to run all the unit tests like within a minute or something like that on my machine, but it takes a pipeline 5 to 10 minutes to run. I don't care because I'm not waiting on that.
Yeah, gotcha. And I saw another feature just looking through the list that popped out at me is when you change some code, NCrunch is tracking which test runs are invalidated based on what code you just changed. Yeah. That's interesting, because a lot of times, I change something, but in order to get the feedback, I need to run the entire test suite, and some of the code bases that I've worked on with, you get over 1,000 unit tests, and it's like, okay, let me run all of them now.
Yeah, it really kind of helps you kind of cut through the noise. If you're only running the unit tests that are impacted by the code changes that you make, it's I don't know. I just keep coming back to it's nice. I don't have to. I don't have to go spelunking through the list of tests to figure out which ones broke. It kind of tells you, all right, this broke here. Fix it.
Right, for sure. Awesome. Well, and I know this isn't a commercial for a tool, but we'll put in the show notes www.ncrunch.net, if I have the right website, where people can go to download the trial and check it out.
Yes, that's it. NCrunch.net. They do have a free demo, like you said, or you can buy a license too.
Awesome. So we'll include that in the show notes. And if people are looking to learn more about you, where can they go?
So you can go to my blog, codegorilla.com. I post stuff on there from time to time. So, and I'm on LinkedIn, of course, like every other developer out there.
LinkedIn, Cardella. We'll include that in the show notes. I smile when I see the that main picture on codegorilla.com with the 800 plus pounds deadlifting. Yeah, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, that was cool. So that was from, I believe, October of 2007, and sold in Austria at the IPF World Powerlifting Championships. And I think that might have been the last deadlift I had that day. And if I remember right, that was 826 on the bar.
Is that your lifetime max?
Yeah, that was the high water mark that I did. I had a near miss at like 848 a few months after that. 826 was cool.
Nice.
Yeah.
The way you put it. Oh, yeah. 826 was cool. For most people, that would be a spine-breaking episode.
Well, here's the way it works, right? So when you're just getting into the sport, right, let's say you hit 300 pounds, right?
Yep.
Okay, that was cool. I wonder what 400's like.
Which, by the way, my 15-year-old son just hit 300 pounds deadlifting.
Nice. That's how it starts. You do 300. Okay, that was cool. I wonder if I could do 400. And you start, hammering down that road, and then you get to 400. And it's like, all right, 400's cool, but, wonder what 500's like. Go to 500, and you're constantly kind of chasing, I'll say it like blocks of 100, right? Mm-hmm. And so once you get up to I thought pulling 700 was cool, but pulling 800 was even cooler than pulling 700. And one of the neat things I remember about it is when you have over 800 on the bar and you start pulling on it, you feel the bar bend in your hands as you're pulling it up, because lighter weight on bars that, I guess let's call it more regular bars, they're stiffer, right? Mm-hmm. So all the weight comes off the ground at one time. When you have 800 on the bar and you have enough weight stacked out, when you start pulling on the bar, you're pulling kind of on the middle of the bar. So the bar tends to bend more, and the inner plates leave the floor before the outer plates do. Mm. And it's weird. You can feel that bend in your hands when you're pulling. So
it progressively gets heavier as those last plates have to leave the ground.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And now they've got like deadlift bars and everything like that are like even longer with more flex in them and stuff like that. I don't like those because they have too much whip in them.
Okay.
So you'd start pulling if you pull fast, right? So the bar's whipping, right? When you pull fast and you get to the top, the weight on the side is still coming up, and then it hits the top and then it comes down. So then it pulls down on your hands that much harder. So that's not fun.
If you don't get all the way up in one motion, it's fighting against you.
If you're pulling quick, if you're pulling slow, then you don't. That kind of whip in the bar is not that big of an issue.
Yeah.
But I'd argue if you're people used to tell me, why didn't you do more? That looked easy, and
why don't they do it?
Yeah. And I have to tell them, well, okay, it's not that it was easy. It's just that I hit it with the right kind of form, right? And when you do it the right way, it becomes easier. You can move the weight faster, and it's a lot easier than if you have to just, I say it's easier. It's not really the right way to put it, but
it's possible.
Yeah, it's possible. But when you're going to get sore from powerlifting meets when you have to grind on the weight that you're doing, whether you've got a squat that's really slow, a bench press that's really slow, or a deadlift that's really slow. That takes it out of you, and that's going to make you a lot more sore than if you just hit the weight, and knock out the attempt quick. So.
Yeah, I like it. You kind of said if you have the right form, it's easier, and not that it's easy, but that it can be done. And it brought me right back to the testing conversation. I'm thinking about some medium-sized code bases, like 500,000 lines of code. You can develop and maintain a 500,000 line of code base, but if you don't have any automated tests, you're just fighting against the code, and you're slow. You're making a change, and all the manual testing you have to do just to know that you didn't break something and that things that invariably are slipping through. But when you use the right form, when you actually have automated test coverage and the layered levels of automated tests, unit tests, integration tests, full system tests, well, now it's not that a 500,000 or even 1,000,000 line code base becomes easy, but it becomes doable.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I had a consultant gig, I guess, probably about a year ago, where we did unit testing and integration. We did that whole bit. And so when I'd make a change in the database, I knew that anything I was committing was good because I had to run all the unit tests and everything like that. I know we had good coverage and everything like that. So I felt really secure about that one. So now one of those later code bases I'm working on, there's 0 tests on it.
Isn't that fun when you inherit a piece of junk code base? You have to do something with.
I'm not going to call this junk because, I've seen some spots in it like, okay, that makes sense. All right, I understand why you're doing it.
Fair enough. It's helping the business succeed. It's been debugged over time. And if we just kind of maintain it, maybe upgrade some libraries. But if we want to go and do some bigger changes, where's our safety net?
Right. And I know how they got there, and I understand how they got there. I just don't feel secure working on that database on that code base, because I know if I make a change and it's wrong, I don't know what else is impacted by that change.
Right.
So, it's
I like the way you said it. You said I don't feel secure. It puts the image of walking a tightrope or a high wire in my head. It's like if you're walking a tightrope across the Grand Canyon, no safety net, you don't feel secure.
Yeah.
But if you've got the wire hanging off, and you got this safety net. The same thing with circus acts with this, the safety net and the trapeze and whatnot. It's like, you know what? There may be a mistake, but that mistake doesn't mean death or a broken neck. That means just like, okay, let me climb back up and try again. No big deal.
Yeah, it's great having the safety net and undo and everything like that. Stuff's great. So, I just don't agree with working without it. Why? I mean, so you're going to give up some speed, I think, out of the gate, right? Of when you're trying to build an application. All right, we're writing our features and our unit tests kind of simultaneously. That's going to take more time when you get started.
Yeah.
But what you're not actually looking at is what does this look like a year down the road when you have, a lot more code written and things like that, and you've started to forget things that were implemented and how they work and things like that. What's actually kind of keeping that tribal knowledge around? And just having unit tests that run all the time, it's kind of like somebody there. You're basically codifying your tribal knowledge and it's always being tested, so when something's gone off the rails. So
yeah, for sure. Well, there's been some studies and surveys on amount of time developers normally spend fixing bugs, and there's some that say, I found the study, I'll include it in the link in the show notes. 8% said they spend 25% of their time fixing bugs. 26% of developers reported spending half of their time fixing bugs. I mean, if you don't have this fast feedback process to let you know that you broke something, then the bugs are going to slip through, and you're going to be in that bad slice of developers that just spend half of the time just fixing problems.
But if you're dealing with a smaller code base, I can see where it's like, no problem. I can, anything that pops up, I can fix. It's not that big of a deal. It's when you start getting to the bigger code bases where,
right?
It's easier to work with a code base if you don't have to. If the cognitive load to understand the code and what you're writing is lower, it makes it easier. So
yeah, well. Smaller code base, I can run it through its paces manually, and it's not that big of a lift. But, right. I mean, a code base doesn't have to get very large before it's not even feasible to run the whole application through its paces manually.
I'd say that unit tests are no substitute for, a good tester, right? But if you have good unit tests covering your code base, and you still have a manual tester, then that frees up that manual tester to focus on testing other scenarios that are going to be harder to codify as a unit test or integration test. So it
one of the on this podcast I've talked about the published research that Capers Jones has put out over tens of thousands of software projects over 40 years. And one of the most effective defect removal techniques that he reports is exploratory testing. And exploratory testing requires some person to explore and think about, I wonder what it would do if I did this. That's exploratory testing. You can't even get to exploratory testing if you're just futzing around with basic breakages and things that used to work no longer work. You all the time is sucked up with just like kind of the rookie stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another annoying thing about this code base that I don't particularly care for, and that's, when you have to go fix a bug, that's what you have to do. You're fixing the bug, so what you're working on, the scope of that is really narrow, but it doesn't let you kind of think of other scenarios that you ought to test, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can if you're thinking broadly enough, but typically when you're just dialed in trying to figure out, okay, the user reported this bug, I'm trying to fix this bug, you just kind of get tunnel vision, and you're not necessarily looking to see, what else is, you should test.
Yep, for sure. All right. We'll include everything we talked about. We'll include links to those in the show notes. This was a fun conversation on testing. As we kind of close up, if someone wants to go deeper into NCrunch, into automated testing, any closing recommendations for them?
I'll tell you, just get Visual Studio or Writer, download a copy of NCrunch, and just write unit tests. Find a small little project that you like that kind of tickles your fancy, and kind of chase after it with unit tests and learn how to use the tools that way. Rather than, I wouldn't just jump into a giant code base with NCrunch. You need to kind of figure out, okay, how it actually works, and then you can incorporate it into a larger code base. So.
Nice. Good advice. Well, Tony, thanks so much for spending some time with us and coming on the Azure and DevOps podcast to share about NCrunch and test automation. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And until next time, dear listener, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure and DevOps podcast. You can find us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Visit our sponsor, ClearMeasure, at www.clearmeasure.com. And on behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.